People only call your dream impossible because they never stayed long enough to watch you build it. I did not understand how true those words were until the evening my own father looked across the dinner table and quietly said, "Ryan, I just want you to stop chasing impossible dreams." The room became so still that I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My mother lowered her eyes toward her plate, pretending to straighten her silverware, while my younger sister Emma glanced at me with the same uncomfortable expression she always wore whenever conversations drifted toward my career. Nobody wanted another argument. We had all been through too many of those already. I forced a small smile and reached for my glass of iced tea before answering. "I appreciate that you worry about me, Dad." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "It is not just worry. You are 32 years old. Most people your age have stable careers, retirement plans, and predictable lives. Every time someone asks what my son does, I never know how to explain it." His words were calm, not angry, which somehow made them hurt even more. My father had spent nearly 35 years managing a manufacturing plant outside Columbus, Ohio. He believed in steady paychecks, arriving early, working honestly, and staying with one company until retirement. I admired that about him. I truly did. But I also knew my life was never going to follow the same path. "I run a software company," I replied quietly. "It is still growing." My father gave a tired smile that carried more sympathy than confidence. "Ryan, you have been saying it is growing for years." Nobody spoke for several seconds. My mother finally broke the silence. "Michael, maybe we should eat before everything gets cold." He nodded politely, but looked back at me. "Son, I am not trying to criticize you. I just hate seeing you waste the best years of your life waiting for something that may never happen." I looked around the table. The roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh green beans, and homemade rolls were exactly the same meal we shared almost every Sunday evening. Everything looked familiar except the feeling inside the room. It seemed as though everyone else had quietly accepted the story that my life had stalled while I was the only one still reading a completely different chapter. Emma tried changing the subject by talking about one of her students at the elementary school where she taught. My mother asked whether anyone wanted more vegetables. My father complimented the pie cooling on the kitchen counter. The conversation slowly returned to ordinary family topics, yet his words continued echoing inside my mind. "Stop chasing impossible dreams." It was not the first time he had said something similar. Over the past 3 years, I had heard dozens of different versions. "Maybe it is time to find a real job. You are too talented to keep struggling. Stability matters more than dreams." I knew every sentence came from love. That almost made them harder to ignore. If he had been cruel, I could have dismissed his opinion. Instead, he genuinely believed he was protecting me from disappointment. After dinner, I helped my mother wash the dishes while my father watched the evening news in the living room. She handed me another plate to dry before speaking softly enough that nobody else could hear. "Your father worries more than he admits." I smiled gently. "I know. He just wants to know you are going to be all right." I placed another clean plate into the cabinet. "I am all right." She hesitated before asking the question she had clearly been carrying all evening. "Are you really?" I stopped for a moment. There were 100 different ways I could have answered. I could have explained that our company had just completed its strongest quarter since opening. I could have told her we had recently signed 2 new regional clients. I could have mentioned that I had spent the previous afternoon interviewing another software engineer because our team was finally expanding again. Instead, I simply nodded. "Yes, Mom, I really am." She studied my face for a few seconds as though trying to decide whether to believe me. Then she smiled and squeezed my shoulder. That is all I wanted to hear. Before leaving, I walked outside with my father while he carried leftovers to my car. The cool Ohio evening felt refreshing after the warm kitchen. Crickets chirped somewhere beyond the backyard fence while porch lights gradually appeared throughout the neighborhood. He placed the container inside my passenger seat and closed the door. "Ryan," he said quietly, "promise me something." "What is that?" "If this business does not work out, promise me you will not be too proud to start over." I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I promise I will always do whatever is necessary." He smiled with relief because he believed we finally understood each other. The truth was we were talking about 2 completely different futures. He imagined me eventually returning to a traditional career. I imagined continuing to build the company until it became everything I believed it could become. Neither of us argued because neither of us wanted to ruin another Sunday evening. I drove home beneath a dark sky filled with quiet stars, replaying every word from dinner in my mind. Part of me wished my parents could see what I saw every morning when I unlocked the office door. They only saw uncertainty. I saw possibility. They saw risk. I saw years of steady progress that had not yet become visible from the outside. They believed my life was standing still because the finish line had not arrived yet. They never noticed how far I had already traveled. 3 days later, while I was reviewing a presentation with my operations director, Sophia Bennett, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I answered with a smile, expecting another routine conversation. Instead, his voice sounded unusually confused. "Ryan," he said, "I just received an invitation in the mail addressed to your mother and me. It says we are invited to a private business event this Friday evening, and your name is printed at the top. I think there must be some kind of mistake." I looked through the conference room window toward the busy office where engineers, designers, and project managers were finishing another productive day. Then I smiled to myself because I knew there had been no mistake at all. I simply replied, "No, Dad. It was meant for you." My father remained silent for several seconds after I told him the invitation was meant for him. Finally, he cleared his throat and asked, "What kind of business event is it?" I glanced towards Sophia Bennett, who was patiently waiting for me to continue reviewing our presentation, and smiled. "It is an appreciation dinner hosted by one of our newest strategic partners. They invited our leadership team and a few family members." There was another pause before my father spoke again. "They invited your mother and me?" "Yes." "Why?" I laughed quietly. "Because I wanted you there." He sounded uncertain rather than excited. "Ryan, are you sure we belong at something like that?" "Absolutely," I answered. "You belong there more than anyone." He thanked me, said he would talk with my mother, and ended the call. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, Sophia smiled knowingly. "Your parents?" she asked. I nodded. "They are coming on Friday." She looked genuinely happy. "I think that is a good idea." I leaned against the conference table and folded my arms. "I hope so." She studied me for a moment before speaking again. "You have never invited them to one of these events before." "No," I admitted. "They have never really understood what we do here." Sophia smiled. "Maybe they are about to." Her words stayed with me long after our meeting ended because deep down I knew Friday evening was about far more than a business dinner. It represented the first real opportunity for my parents to step into the world I had been trying to build for the last 3 years. Until then, everything they knew came from brief conversations during Sunday dinners or short phone calls where I usually avoided talking about work. It was easier that way. Every time I mentioned a new customer, they asked how much longer I planned to keep taking risks. Every time I described hiring another employee, they wondered whether I should slow down instead of expanding. They measured progress differently than I did. They looked for certainty. I looked for momentum. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, I remained at the office finishing a few reports. The building became unusually quiet once the last keyboard stopped clicking and the final office lights switched off down the hallway. I walked through each department before locking up, something I had done almost every night since opening the company. As I passed empty desks, I noticed family photographs, children's drawings, coffee mugs, notebooks, and jackets hanging over chairs. Those ordinary objects reminded me that our company was no longer just my dream. It supported dozens of lives beyond my own. Every project mattered because every paycheck mattered. Every satisfied customer helped another family feel more secure. That responsibility motivated me far more than personal success ever could. Before leaving, I paused beside the framed mission statement hanging near the front entrance. We had written it during our first year when there were only 5 of us working in a cramped rented office. It read, "Build technology that makes work easier while treating every person with honesty and respect." We had never changed a single word. The next morning started earlier than usual. I arrived before sunrise to prepare for another customer demonstration scheduled later that afternoon. As employees gradually filled the office, several stopped by my desk to ask final questions about Friday's event. One of our software engineers joked that the dinner would finally give everyone an excuse to wear something other than company polo shirts. Another teammate laughed and said his wife had already planned what they were wearing days earlier. Their excitement reminded me how important these gatherings had become. They celebrated not only business milestones, but also the people who had worked tirelessly to reach them. Around lunchtime, David Reynolds called. He served as chief executive officer of one of our newest business partners and had quickly become someone I respected. "Ryan," he said cheerfully, "everything is ready for Friday evening. We are looking forward to introducing your team to several industry leaders." "Thank you," I replied. "Everyone is excited." "Good," he said. "I also noticed you included your parents on the guest list. That was a nice touch." I smiled. I thought it was time they saw what everyone has been building together. David laughed warmly. Sometimes family members need to experience something themselves before they truly understand it. After ending the call, I found myself staring out the office window toward the parking lot where employees came and went throughout the day. His words echoed my own thoughts. Experience changes people in ways explanations rarely can. I could spend years describing our company to my parents, but one evening surrounded by customers, employees, and business partners might accomplish more than every conversation we had ever shared. Later that evening, I drove home through downtown Columbus as the setting sun reflected against office buildings and storefront windows. Traffic moved slowly, giving me plenty of time to think. My mind drifted back 3 years to a completely different drive home, one where I had questioned every decision I was making. I could still remember the uncertainty, the fear, and the constant pressure to choose the safer path. There had been moments when giving up seemed perfectly reasonable. There had been evenings when a steady paycheck sounded far more attractive than another month of uncertainty. Yet every time I considered walking away, something inside me insisted I continue one more day. Those memories felt strangely distant now, but they remained part of every achievement our company celebrated. Success always looked simple after it happened. Living through it had been anything but simple. Thursday passed quickly as everyone completed final preparations for Friday's event. Sophia reviewed presentation materials while our project managers finalized customer reports and our support team confirmed travel schedules. The office buzzed with quiet confidence rather than nervousness because everyone knew exactly what they needed to do. Watching them work together reminded me that none of this had appeared overnight. Every capable employee, every satisfied customer, and every opportunity had been earned through hundreds of ordinary days filled with consistent effort. Late Thursday afternoon, my mother called. "Your father already picked out his suit," she said with a soft laugh. "I have not seen him this nervous in years." I smiled. "Tell him there is nothing to worry about. He keeps asking what he should expect." I looked across the office where my team continued working without realizing how much Friday evening meant to me personally. Then I answered honestly. "Tell him not to expect anything. Just come with an open mind." She promised they would. After hanging up, I realized I had no idea what would happen once my parents stepped into the world they had spent years misunderstanding. I only knew that by the end of Friday evening, they would no longer be judging my life from a distance. For the very first time, they were about to see it with their own eyes. Friday arrived faster than I expected. I woke before my alarm, not because I was nervous about the presentation or the business dinner, but because I kept wondering how my parents would react once they stepped into a world they had only imagined from a distance. The office was already busy when I arrived just after 7 o'clock that morning. Sophia Bennett was reviewing the final event schedule with our project managers, while several engineers completed last-minute software demonstrations that would be displayed during the evening reception. Everyone seemed energized. It was the kind of atmosphere that naturally develops when people know they have accomplished something meaningful together. As I walked through the office, employees greeted me with relaxed smiles and casual conversations about the evening ahead. Some asked whether my parents were still planning to attend. Others joked that they hoped my father would finally understand why I sometimes answered work calls on Sunday afternoons. I laughed along with them, but inside I knew their questions carried more significance than they realized. My parents had spent the last 3 years believing my company was little more than an uncertain experiment. My team had spent those same 3 years helping transform that experiment into a business trusted by customers throughout the region. Around mid-morning, Sophia entered my office carrying the final presentation folder. She placed it on my desk before taking a seat across from me. "Everything is ready," she said confidently. "The customer demonstrations are set, the event agenda has been confirmed, and David Reynolds called earlier to make sure your parents receive a proper welcome." I smiled. That was thoughtful of him. She nodded. He understands how important tonight is. I looked down at the folder but made no effort to open it. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and stared through the office window. Do you ever wonder how differently people see the same story? I asked. Sophia smiled thoughtfully. All the time. My parents see uncertainty every time they look at my career. Our employees see opportunity. Customers see solutions. Investors see growth. Somehow everyone is looking at the same company. Sophia folded her hands together. That is because everyone is looking from a different point in the journey. Your parents only saw the beginning. We have been here for everything that happened after. Her answer stayed with me for the rest of the day because it perfectly explained something I had struggled to put into words. Nobody was intentionally wrong. They simply possessed different pieces of the same story. Shortly after lunch, our newest software engineer knocked on my office door. His name was Tyler Morgan, a recent college graduate who had joined our company 6 months earlier. Do you have a minute? He asked. Of course. He stepped inside holding a small notebook. I just wanted to thank you before tonight. I know everyone keeps talking about the event, but I wanted you to know this job changed my life. I smiled, slightly surprised. I appreciate you saying that. He shook his head. No, I really mean it. I spent nearly a year sending applications everywhere after graduation. Most companies wanted experience I did not have yet. You were the first person who looked at my willingness to learn instead of everything missing from my resume. I listened quietly as he continued. My parents were beginning to think I would have to move back home permanently. Now I finally have my own apartment, I am paying off my student loans, and I actually enjoy coming to work every morning. He thanked me again before returning to his desk. After he left, I sat quietly for several moments, thinking about his words. I had started this company hoping to build meaningful technology, but somewhere along the way I realized building people mattered even more. Every opportunity we created extended beyond our office walls into someone's family, someone's future, and someone's confidence. That realization had quietly become the purpose behind every decision I made. By late afternoon, the office gradually shifted from work mode into preparation for the evening event. Employees exchanged polo shirts for suits and dresses, while conversations turned from project deadlines to dinner reservations and family introductions. The atmosphere felt relaxed because everyone knew they belonged there. Watching them laugh together reminded me of how different things had been during our first year, when every dollar mattered and every customer felt like the difference between surviving another month or closing our doors forever. Those difficult days seemed far away now, yet I never wanted to forget them because they shaped the culture we protected every day. At exactly 5 o'clock, I received a text message from my mother. We just parked. Your father has asked me 3 times if he tied his tie correctly. I smiled without realizing it and walked toward the front entrance. Outside, the evening air carried the pleasant warmth of early autumn while employees and their families arrived one group at a time. I immediately spotted my parents walking slowly across the parking lot. My father wore the navy blue suit he had saved for weddings and special occasions. My mother smiled the moment she saw me and gave me a warm hug. My father straightened his jacket before shaking my hand in the slightly formal way he always did whenever he felt uncertain. This place is bigger than I expected, he admitted while looking around the modern conference center where the event was being held. It is a nice venue, I replied. He glanced toward dozens of guests entering through the main doors. Are all these people connected to your company? Most of them are customers, business partners, employees, and their families. He slowly nodded without saying anything else. As we stepped inside, a member of the event staff immediately greeted us by name and escorted us toward the reception area. Before I could introduce my parents to anyone, David Reynolds noticed us from across the room. He walked over with an easy smile and extended his hand toward my father. You must be Ryan's parents, he said warmly. I have been hoping to meet the 2 people who raised one of the most respected business leaders I have worked with in years. I watched my father's expression change almost instantly. He looked at David, then at me, as though trying to determine whether he had heard those words correctly. Without realizing it, the evening had already begun changing everything. My father slowly shook David Reynolds' hand, still trying to process what he had just heard. It is nice to meet you, he replied politely. David smiled at both of my parents before looking back at me. Ryan never gives himself enough credit, so I am glad the 2 of you could make it tonight. You are going to see why so many companies enjoy working with his team. My father nodded without saying much, but I recognized the expression on his face. It was the same look he used whenever he encountered something that did not fit the picture he had already formed in his mind. We continued into the reception area, where conversations filled the room with an easy energy. Small groups of guests stood around tall tables discussing new projects, sharing stories, and introducing family members. Waitstaff moved quietly through the crowd serving appetizers, while a large display screen highlighted several of our recent customer success stories. My parents looked around carefully, taking in every detail without speaking. I could almost see them comparing this evening to the image they had carried for years of me struggling alone inside a small office with little chance of success. "Ryan." I turned and saw Tyler Morgan approaching with his parents beside him. "I wanted you to meet my family." I introduced everyone, and Tyler immediately smiled at my father. "Sir, thank you for raising someone willing to take a chance on people like me." My father looked surprised. "What do you mean?" Tyler answered with complete sincerity. "After college, I spent almost a year looking for work. Most companies wanted someone with more experience. Ryan hired me because he believed I could grow into the role. It changed everything for me." Tyler's mother nodded with appreciation. "We will always be grateful for that opportunity." My father glanced toward me for only a moment before thanking them politely. As Tyler and his family continued greeting other guests, my mother quietly asked, "Does everyone know you this well?" I smiled. "We spend a lot of time working together." Before she could respond, another employee joined us. This time it was Jennifer Collins, one of our senior project managers. "Ryan," she said warmly, "I have been looking forward to meeting your parents." She turned toward them with an easy smile. "Your son has built a wonderful place to work." My father responded carefully. "He has always worked hard." Jennifer laughed softly. "That is an understatement. During my first year here, he personally stayed late almost every evening helping every department solve problems. Whenever someone needed support, he was already walking toward them before they even asked." She smiled at me before returning to another conversation across the room. My father remained unusually quiet after she left. We slowly walked farther into the reception area where several customers were examining interactive software demonstrations prepared by our engineering team. One business owner noticed me and immediately waved us over. "Ryan, good to see you." We shook hands before I introduced my parents. The customer smiled warmly. "I have wanted to thank you in person again. Your team helped us modernize our entire scheduling system. We were wasting hours every week before working with your company. Now everything runs more smoothly." My father listened carefully as the customer continued describing improvements that had allowed his employees to spend more time serving clients instead of dealing with paperwork. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but by the time we walked away, I noticed my father looking back toward the demonstration area with genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. A few moments later, Sophia Bennett joined us carrying several event programs. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she said warmly, "I am so happy you could come." She handed each of them a program before adding, "Ryan talks about his family more often than you probably realize." My mother smiled. "Only good things, I hope." Sophia laughed. "Always." Then she looked toward my father. "I should probably warn you that tonight many people will stop to thank your son. He never enjoys being the center of attention, but he deserves every bit of it." My father looked almost uncomfortable hearing those words. "He was always a quiet kid," he admitted. Sophia smiled knowingly. "He is still quiet. He just leads by listening instead of talking." Before walking away to help another guest, she gently touched my shoulder and whispered, "Everything is going exactly as it should." I watched my parents as they continued reading through the event program. Alongside the evening agenda were photographs of our leadership team, company milestones, and several community outreach projects we had supported over the past year. My mother paused on one page, showing volunteers from our office helping local high school students prepare for technology careers. "You never told us about this," she said softly. "It was a team effort," I answered. "Everyone wanted to help." She looked back down at the photograph before quietly saying, "You look happy." I smiled because it was such a simple observation, yet perhaps the most important one she had ever made. For years, my parents had focused on whether my career appeared stable enough. They had rarely asked whether it gave me purpose. The ballroom doors soon opened, inviting everyone inside for dinner. Round tables filled the elegant room, each decorated with simple centerpieces and small name cards. My parents discovered they had been seated at the same table as David Reynolds, two longtime customers, Sophia and me. As conversations began over dinner, I noticed something slowly changing in my father's posture. Earlier, he had entered the building with hesitant steps and cautious questions. Now he leaned forward, listening closely as people shared stories about projects we had completed together. Nobody exaggerated. Nobody spoke in rehearsed compliments. They simply described ordinary experiences of working with our company, and again my name appeared naturally within those conversations. During the main course, David lifted his glass and smiled toward my parents. "There is one thing I have learned about Ryan over the past year," he said. "Technology brought our companies together, but character is why we continue working with him." The entire table nodded in agreement. I looked toward my father, who lowered his eyes for a brief moment before looking back at David. It was the first time all evening I saw uncertainty replaced not with doubt, but with quiet reflection. Without realizing it, the story he had believed about my life for so many years was beginning to unravel one conversation at a time. As dinner came to an end, the lights in the ballroom gradually dimmed, and a large screen at the front of the room came to life. A quiet excitement spread across the tables as guests turned their attention toward the stage. David Reynolds stepped to the podium with the calm confidence that had made him one of the most respected leaders in our industry. He welcomed everyone, thanked our employees, customers, and business partners for making the evening possible, and spoke briefly about how successful partnerships were never built by software alone, but by trust earned over time. Then he smiled in my direction. "Tonight," he said, "I have the privilege of recognizing a company that has consistently delivered more than technical solutions. They have earned respect by keeping their promises, solving difficult problems, and treating every customer as though their success matters just as much as their own." The screen behind him displayed photographs from projects our team had completed over the past 3 years. My parents watched silently as images of our employees working with customers appeared one after another. They saw conference rooms, manufacturing facilities, medical offices, schools, and small businesses that had trusted us with important parts of their operations. None of those photographs had been staged. They represented ordinary days that slowly built an extraordinary reputation. David continued speaking. "When we first met Ryan Carter, he spent very little time talking about revenue or market share. Instead, he talked about people. He talked about helping small businesses compete with larger companies by giving them technology they could actually use. That kind of thinking is rare." I noticed my father slowly straighten in his chair without taking his eyes off the stage. My mother quietly folded her hands together in her lap. Neither of them said a word. David invited me to join him at the podium for a brief conversation about our partnership. As I walked across the ballroom, I resisted the temptation to look toward my parents. I wanted them to experience the evening naturally instead of watching for my reaction. David welcomed me with a handshake before asking a simple question. "Ryan, after everything your company has accomplished, what achievement makes you the proudest?" It would have been easy to mention customer growth, new partnerships, or expanding our team, but none of those answers felt right. I smiled and looked toward the audience. "The achievement I value most is seeing talented people discover confidence they did not know they had. Software changes businesses. Encouragement changes lives. If our company has done anything well, I hope it is helping people believe they are capable of more than they imagined." The audience responded with warm applause. David nodded thoughtfully before asking another question. "What do you look for when hiring someone?" I answered without hesitation. "Character first. Skills can be taught. Integrity cannot. I would rather invest in someone who is willing to learn than someone who believes they already know everything." Several employees smiled because they had heard me repeat that philosophy many times inside the office. David thanked me before inviting everyone to watch a short video highlighting stories from customers and employees. As the lights dimmed again, interviews filled the screen. One customer described how our software allowed her family business to grow without overwhelming her staff. Another explained that our team answered every question with patience, even months after the project was completed. Then Tyler Morgan appeared on the screen. He spoke about joining the company after struggling to find his first professional opportunity. "Ryan did not hire me because my resume was perfect," he said. "He hired me because he believed people deserve a chance to grow. Every leader talks about investing in people. He actually does it." More interviews followed. Jennifer Collins described the collaborative culture inside our office. Sophia Bennett spoke about leading with humility instead of ego. Another customer explained that working with us never felt like being treated as an account number. Throughout the video, I could sense my parents absorbing every word. These were not polished advertisements or scripted speeches. They were ordinary people sharing genuine experiences. When the lights came back on, I finally glanced toward my table. My father was still looking at the stage, but his expression had completely changed. The skepticism I had seen for years was gone. In its place was something much quieter, something closer to disbelief mixed with reflection. During the short break that followed, several guests approached our table. One after another, they thanked our team for solving difficult challenges, introducing them to new opportunities, or simply being dependable when problems appeared. My parents politely greeted every person, but I noticed they spent more time listening than speaking. Eventually, an older gentleman introduced himself as Harold Simmons, the owner of a manufacturing company that had been one of our earliest customers. He smiled warmly at my father. "You must be proud of your son." My father hesitated for just a moment before answering. "Tonight has been enlightening." Harold laughed kindly. "I understand. When Ryan first visited my office years ago, I almost turned him away because his company was still so small. He asked for 30 minutes to explain his ideas. By the end of the meeting, I realized I was not looking at a young man chasing unrealistic dreams. I was looking at someone who had prepared more carefully than most executives I had worked with." Harold smiled toward me before continuing. "Taking that chance was one of the best business decisions I ever made." After he walked away, my father remained silent for several moments. Finally, he looked at me and quietly asked, "How long have people been saying things like this?" I smiled gently. "For a while now." He frowned slightly. "Why did you never tell us?" I thought carefully before answering. "Because I did not want you to believe me just because I said it. I hoped one day you would see it for yourselves." My father lowered his eyes for a moment, slowly nodding as though replaying years of conversations inside his own mind. My mother reached over and gently rested her hand on his arm without saying anything. For the first time since arriving that evening, nobody at our table felt the need to fill the silence with polite conversation. Sometimes the truth speaks most clearly after every explanation has already been given. And as I looked around the ballroom filled with employees, customers, partners, and families enjoying the evening together, I realized that nothing I could have said during those Sunday dinners would ever have been as powerful as what my parents had just witnessed with their own eyes. When the evening finally began winding down, guests slowly gathered their coats and exchanged final conversations before heading home. My parents remained unusually quiet as we walked together toward the parking lot. The excitement inside the ballroom gradually faded behind us, replaced by the cool autumn air and the gentle sound of distant traffic. For several minutes, none of us spoke. My father simply walked beside me with his hands in his coat pockets, looking thoughtful in a way I had rarely seen before. We reached their car, but instead of unlocking the doors, he turned toward me. "Do you have a little time?" he asked. "Of course," I answered. "Would you like to get some coffee?" My mother smiled softly. "I think that would be nice." A few minutes later, we were sitting together inside a quiet diner that stayed open late near the interstate. It was almost empty except for a couple sharing dessert in the corner and a truck driver reading a newspaper near the counter. The waitress filled our coffee cups, wished us a pleasant evening, and left us alone. My father stared into his cup for several moments before speaking. "I owe you an apology." I immediately shook my head. "Dad, you do not have to apologize." He looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before. "Yes, I do." His voice remained calm, but every word carried sincerity. "For years I believed I understood your life. Tonight, I realized I only understood the parts one could see." My mother quietly nodded beside him. "We knew you were working hard," she said. "We just never realized what all that work had become." I smiled gently. "It took a long time." My father leaned forward. "Tell me something honestly. Were there times when you wanted to quit?" I laughed softly because the answer seemed almost obvious to me. "More times than I can count." He looked genuinely surprised. "You never told us." "Because every time we talked, I knew you already wanted me to stop. If I had admitted how difficult things were, you would have believed it proved you were right." He slowly nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup and found myself thinking back to the beginning of everything. "Do you remember when I left my engineering job?" I asked. I remember. My father answered immediately. I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life. I smiled. Honestly, there were days when I wondered the same thing. They both looked at me with complete attention, so I continued. The first 6 months were harder than I ever expected. I rented a tiny office because I could not afford anything larger. Most days I worked alone from sunrise until late at night. I wrote software during the day, answered customer emails in the evening, and studied business contracts after midnight because I could not afford an attorney. My mother quietly reached for my hand across the table. Why did you never tell us? Because I did not want you to worry more than you already were. I took a slow breath before continuing. There were months when I paid my employees before paying myself. Sometimes I went several weeks without taking any salary at all because making payroll mattered more. I sold my newer car and bought an older one to reduce expenses. I canceled vacations. I stopped buying things I did not absolutely need. Every dollar stayed inside the business because I believed if we could survive just one more month, we would eventually reach the next opportunity. Neither of my parents interrupted. They simply listened. There were nights when I locked the office and sat alone in the parking lot wondering whether I was asking too much of everyone who believed in me. Not because I wanted to quit, but because I carried responsibility for every employee who trusted me enough to build something together. My father slowly shook his head. I had no idea. I know, I answered quietly. From the outside, it probably looked like nothing was changing. From the inside, everything was changing, just slowly enough that most people could not see it. My mother smiled sadly. Every Sunday, we kept asking when you were finally going to succeed. I nodded. And every Sunday, I wanted to tell you that success was already happening. It just did not look dramatic yet. One new customer, one new employee, one solved problem, one recommendation. It never happened all at once. My father looked down at the table before speaking again. I always believed success arrived with one big moment. I smiled. Most people do. But those moments only exist because of thousands of ordinary days that nobody notices. The waitress quietly refilled our coffee before leaving us alone again. My father looked out the window for a long moment before turning back toward me. Do you remember when I kept encouraging you to send applications back to engineering companies? I laughed softly. Every week. He smiled for the first time since we sat down. I even printed job listings for you. You did. He rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. I thought I was helping. You were trying to protect me. He looked directly into my eyes. I was also protecting myself. Watching your son choose a path you do not understand is frightening. A steady paycheck made sense to me because it was the only life I had ever known. His honesty caught me by surprise. For the first time, I was no longer listening to my father as someone criticizing my choices. I was listening to a man admitting his own fears. Dad, I said quietly, I never wanted a different life because I thought yours was wrong. I only wanted to build the life that felt right for me. He smiled with tears beginning to gather in his eyes. I think I finally understand that. My mother gently squeezed both of our hands and smiled through her own emotions. We remained there for another hour talking not about software, business strategies, or financial growth, but about the years we had misunderstood each other despite sitting around the same family table almost every Sunday. Somewhere between the coffee cups, the quiet conversations, and the long overdue honesty, I realized the most meaningful achievement of the evening had nothing to do with customers, partnerships, or recognition. It was the simple fact that for the first time in years, my parents were no longer trying to imagine my journey. They were finally beginning to understand it. The following Sunday felt different before I even pulled into my parents' driveway. For years, our weekly dinners had followed the same familiar rhythm. My mother prepared enough food for everyone to take leftovers home. My father talked about local news or home improvement projects. Emma shared stories from her classroom, and eventually someone asked how my business was doing. That question almost always led to an uncomfortable silence or another well-meaning lecture about finding something more secure. This time I noticed something had changed the moment my father opened the front door. Instead of greeting me with, "How is work going?" he smiled and said, "Come in. I have been looking forward to seeing you." It sounded simple, but I could hear the difference immediately. There was curiosity in his voice instead of concern. During dinner, nobody mentioned finding a different job. Nobody suggested backup plans or safer careers. Instead, my father surprised everyone by asking, "What project are you working on this week?" Emma looked at him with a puzzled smile before glancing toward me. I answered by, describing a new software platform we were building for several regional healthcare providers. Rather than nodding politely and changing the subject as he usually did, my father leaned forward and asked another question. What problem does it solve? I explained how it would reduce administrative work so medical staff could spend more time with patients instead of paperwork. He listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification whenever I used technical language. By the end of the conversation, he smiled and said, "I may not understand every detail, but I understand why people would need something like that." It was probably the first discussion we had ever shared about my work that ended with understanding instead of disagreement. After dinner, my mother disappeared into the kitchen while Emma left to meet a friend, leaving my father and me sitting alone on the back porch. The evening air carried the familiar scent of freshly cut grass from neighboring yards while children laughed somewhere down the street. My father rested his coffee mug on the small wooden table beside him before speaking. "I have been thinking about our conversation all week." I smiled. "Me too." He nodded slowly. "After Friday night, I started reading about your company." I looked at him with surprise. "You did?" "I found your website first. Then I read several customer reviews. After that, I watched an interview you gave to a local business podcast last year." I laughed softly. I forgot that interview was still online. He smiled. "You sounded exactly the same as you do at home." "Hopefully that is a good thing." "It is," he replied. "You were talking about helping small businesses compete without forcing them to spend money they could not afford. You never sounded interested in becoming famous. You sounded interested in solving problems." I looked across the backyard for a moment before answering. "That has always been the goal." He folded his hands together. "I realized something while listening to you. All these years I kept measuring your life by comparing it to mine. I thought success had to look the way it looked for me." I quietly nodded. "I think a lot of people do that." He smiled with a mixture of humility and regret. "I never asked what success meant to you. I simply assumed I already knew." Before I could answer, my mother stepped onto the porch carrying a small cardboard box. She placed it on the table between us and smiled. "I found this while cleaning the basement yesterday." I opened the box and immediately recognized an old notebook covered with worn blue fabric. My heart almost stopped for a second because I had not seen it in years. I gently picked it up and laughed. "I cannot believe you still have this." My father looked at it curiously. "What is it?" I carefully opened the notebook. The first pages contained rough sketches, handwritten notes, early software ideas, and pages filled with crossed-out business names. Some of the handwriting was barely readable because I had written it so quickly during lunch breaks at my engineering job years earlier. "This is where everything started," I said quietly. "Before there was a company, before there were employees, before there were customers, there was just this notebook." My mother smiled warmly. "You carried it everywhere." I turned another page showing a simple list titled, "Things Worth Building." At the top, I had written one sentence in large letters. "Create something that helps people do meaningful work more easily." My father read the words several times before looking at me. "You wrote this before you quit your job?" "Almost a year before." He slowly shook his head. "I always believed you made a sudden decision." I smiled. "It never felt sudden to me. I spent months researching, saving money, learning about business, and planning every step I could think of. I knew there would still be risks, but I wanted them to be thoughtful risks." He carefully turned another page filled with financial goals, product ideas, and notes about company culture. One sentence caught his attention. "Hire people for character. Teach everything else." He looked up at me and laughed quietly. "You still say this?" "Because I still believe it." My father closed the notebook gently and rested his hand on the cover for a moment. "Ryan, I think I misunderstood something important." I waited patiently. "I kept believing your company was something you created after leaving your engineering job. But looking at this notebook, I realize your company existed long before that. It simply existed here first." He tapped the notebook lightly with one finger. I smiled because he had expressed something I had never found the right words to explain. Dreams rarely begin the day everyone else notices them. They usually begin in quiet moments when nobody is paying attention. We spent another hour turning pages, laughing at rough sketches that looked nothing like our finished products, and reading optimistic notes written by a younger version of myself who had no idea how difficult the journey would become. Yet despite all the mistakes, revisions, and unrealistic timelines filling those pages, one thing remained unchanged. The purpose behind the work had survived every challenge. As I closed the notebook and placed it back inside the box, my father looked at me with a gentle smile and said, "I think I am finally meeting the son who has been sitting across the dinner table all these years." The strange part is that he has been there the whole time. I was simply looking in the wrong direction. Over the next several months, something remarkable happened, not inside my company, but inside my family. The conversations that once ended with polite disagreements gradually turned into genuine curiosity. My father no longer called to ask whether I had considered applying for engineering positions. Instead, he occasionally called with questions about leadership, hiring, or customers he had heard me mention during previous conversations. Sometimes he would read an article about technology in the local newspaper and save it because he thought I might find it interesting. Those gestures seemed small, but to me they represented something much larger. He was no longer standing outside my world hoping I would leave it behind. He was stepping into it one question at a time. One Tuesday afternoon, he surprised me with another phone call. "Are you busy?" he asked. "I have about 15 minutes before my next meeting," I answered. "Good," he replied. "I was thinking about something you said a few weeks ago." I smiled. That could mean almost anything. He laughed. "You mentioned that your employees are your greatest responsibility." I kept thinking about that because when I managed the manufacturing plant, I used to feel exactly the same way. Every decision affected families, not just production schedules. I leaned back in my office chair, realizing we were finally speaking the same language. We were no longer comparing careers. We were discussing responsibility. "I think good leadership looks similar no matter what industry you work in," I said. "People remember how you treated them long after they forget individual projects." He was quiet for a moment before answering. "I wish I had realized sooner that we were more alike than I thought." That sentence stayed with me long after our conversation ended. For years I had believed my father and I were walking in opposite directions. In reality, we had always shared many of the same values. We both believed in honesty, consistency, hard work, and taking care of the people who depended on us. The difference had never been our principles. It had only been the path we chose to live them out. A few weeks later, our company hosted an open house for local business owners and community leaders. It was designed to introduce people to our work, offer educational workshops, and create opportunities for small businesses to connect with one another. As we finalized preparations, Sophia Bennett walked into my office holding the registration list. "You have 2 unexpected guests," she said with a smile. I looked at the list and immediately laughed. My parents had registered several days earlier without telling me. They arrived just before the event began. This time there was no hesitation in my father's steps as he entered the building. Instead of quietly following me, he greeted several employees by name, remembering them from the appreciation dinner months earlier. Jennifer waved enthusiastically when she saw him. Tyler walked over to ask how retirement was treating him. Even Sophia received a warm handshake and a conversation about her family. Watching those interactions filled me with gratitude because they felt completely natural. My parents were no longer visitors who felt out of place. They had become familiar faces welcomed by people who genuinely appreciated them. During one workshop, I stepped to the back of the room and noticed my father sitting in the audience taking notes. At first, I assumed he was simply trying to follow the presentation, but later he admitted something that made me laugh. "I wrote down several ideas because our church has been struggling with volunteer scheduling," he explained. "I thought maybe some of your planning methods could help us organize things better." I smiled. "You are becoming more innovative than you realize." He laughed. "Do not tell anyone. I have a reputation to protect." My mother shook her head with an amused smile. "You should hear him at home now. Every time someone mentions technology, he says, 'Let me tell you what Ryan's team is working on.'" I could not help laughing. "That sounds very different from a year ago." She nodded gently. "Very different." As the event continued, I noticed something else that I had not expected. My father spent nearly as much time talking with employees as he did with me. He asked Tyler how his career was progressing. He congratulated Jennifer on a recent project. He thanked our support staff for helping customers with patience. None of those conversations were formal. They were simply genuine expressions of appreciation. Later that afternoon, I found him standing near the break room looking through a wall covered with photographs from company events over the years. There were pictures from volunteer projects, holiday celebrations, team lunches, customer visits, and employee anniversaries. He pointed toward one photograph taken during our second year in business. "Was that the office before this one?" he asked. "Yes," I answered. We barely fit everyone inside. He smiled while studying the picture. You look tired. I laughed. I probably was. But everyone around you is smiling. He looked back at me thoughtfully. I think that is what I missed before. I kept focusing on whether your journey looked difficult. I never noticed how much joy you found in doing the work. I quietly nodded because he had discovered something I had struggled to explain for years. There had certainly been difficult days, but purpose has a remarkable way of making hard work feel meaningful instead of discouraging. As the event came to an end, my parents stayed behind while employees cleaned up tables and packed away equipment. Without anyone asking, my father picked up a stack of folding chairs and carried them toward the storage room. Tyler quickly walked over to help him. They laughed together while moving furniture, looking less like strangers from different generations and more like longtime coworkers finishing another successful day. Standing there watching them, I realized that the greatest change had never been financial growth, customer recognition, or business success. The greatest change was seeing my father no longer trying to rescue me from the life I had chosen. Instead, he had become someone quietly cheering for it, understanding that the dream he once feared had become a place where other people could build their own futures as well. 1 year later, I stood near the entrance of our headquarters watching employees welcome guests to our annual company celebration, and I found myself smiling at how much life could change in 12 quiet months. The event had grown larger than anyone expected. Families filled the lobby, children laughed while exploring demonstration booths, customers greeted employees like old friends, and conversations echoed throughout the building with the comfortable energy of people who genuinely enjoyed being together. Looking around, I no longer saw the small startup I had once struggled to keep alive. I saw a community built one ordinary day at a time. Sophia Bennett walked over holding a clipboard before smiling at me. Everything is ready, she said. The presentations are set, the volunteers are in place, and your parents just arrived. I turned toward the entrance and immediately spotted them. My father and mother walked through the front doors with relaxed smiles, greeting employees before they even reached me. Tyler was the first to welcome them, shaking my father's hand as though greeting an old friend. Jennifer soon joined them, asking my mother about her garden after remembering a conversation they had shared months earlier. Watching those simple moments filled me with quiet gratitude because they represented relationships that had formed naturally over time. My parents no longer entered our office feeling like outsiders trying to understand an unfamiliar world. They walked in like people returning to a place that had become meaningful to them as well. My father finally reached me and smiled. Looks like you have been busy. I laughed. A little. He looked around the busy office before shaking his head with quiet admiration. No, he said. All of you have been busy. I noticed the difference immediately. A year earlier, he would have focused entirely on me. Now he recognized the entire team. Success was no longer one person's accomplishment in his mind. It belonged to everyone who had contributed along the way. Throughout the afternoon, my parents joined customer presentations, visited project demonstrations, and spoke with employees from every department. More than once I noticed my father standing quietly while listening to younger team members describe ideas for future products. He asked thoughtful questions, encouraged them, and thanked them for their work. At one point I walked past a conference room and overheard him telling a new employee, "You are fortunate to work somewhere that believes in helping people grow." The young employee smiled and answered, "We are fortunate to have leaders who believe that too." Hearing those words made me pause because I realized my father was no longer simply describing my company. He had become part of the culture by understanding what mattered most about it. Later that afternoon, everyone gathered inside the main presentation room for a brief reflection on the past year. Instead of highlighting revenue or expansion plans, we shared stories about customers whose businesses had grown, nonprofit organizations we had supported, and employees who had reached important personal milestones. One teammate had completed graduate school while working full-time. Another had purchased a first home. Tyler announced that he had finished paying off his student loans. Every achievement received warm applause because everyone understood those victories belonged to families as much as individuals. As the presentation ended, Sophia unexpectedly invited me to say a few words. I thanked our employees, customers, partners, and families for believing in the vision we had built together. Then I looked toward my parents sitting near the front of the room. The most meaningful lessons I have learned over the past few years did not come from software, business books, or leadership conferences, I said. They came from understanding that people usually judge a journey by the chapter they happen to see. Sometimes they meet you during your hardest season and assume that season defines your future. Sometimes they only notice the destination and never realize how many ordinary mornings made it possible. That is why kindness matters. You never know which chapter someone else is living through. The room grew quiet before warm applause filled the space once again. After the event ended and the last guests slowly made their way home, my parents stayed behind as they often did now. Employees laughed while putting away tables, collecting decorations, and stacking chairs. My father naturally joined them without anyone asking, carrying boxes alongside Tyler and several others, while joking about how retirement had not reduced his workload after all. Once everything was finished, the building settled into a peaceful silence. My parents and I stood together near the front entrance looking out across the parking lot as the evening sun slowly disappeared below the horizon. My father folded his arms and remained quiet for several moments before speaking. "Ryan, do you remember what I used to tell you?" I smiled. "Which time?" He laughed softly. "Almost every Sunday I kept telling you to stop chasing impossible dreams." I nodded. "I remember." He looked around the office one last time before turning back toward me. His eyes carried warmth instead of regret. "I spent years waiting for you to become successful," he said quietly. "What I never realized was that success was already happening. It was there every time you chose to keep going when nobody was watching. It was there every time you treated people with respect instead of chasing recognition. It was there every time you helped someone else build a better future." I simply did not know where to look. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My mother slipped her arm through his and smiled with tears of quiet happiness in her eyes. I looked back through the office windows where the lights still glowed softly above empty desks waiting for another workday to begin. I thought about the lonely nights, the uncertain mornings, the difficult conversations, and every ordinary moment that had seemed too small to matter while I was living through it. Looking back, I finally understood that none of those days had been ordinary at all. They had been laying one brick at a time beneath a future nobody else could yet see. My father placed his hand gently on my shoulder before we walked toward the parking lot together. This time there were no speeches, no explanations, and no misunderstandings left between us. There was only the quiet comfort of knowing that the people I loved had finally seen the journey for what it had always been. Success was never created in one unforgettable evening. That evening only revealed what years of quiet faith, steady effort, honest work, and patient perseverance had already built. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not changing your life. Sometimes it is simply helping the people you love see the life you have been building all along.